I'd give up forever to touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't want to go home right now. And all I can taste is this moment, and all I can breathe is your life. When sooner or later it's over, I just don't want to miss you tonight. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. Can't fight the tears that ain't coming, or the moment of truth in your eyes. And everything feels like the movies. Yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. To touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. Everything's made to be broken. I just want you to know who I am. Not having another monitor sucks, but okay. I'll get one this or next time. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. Of course, that's Iris by Goo Goo Dolls. Honestly, it sounds a lot more repetitive than when you're singing it. When you're singing it, it actually doesn't really feel that repetitive. Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. Welcome to the final show. Hope you're wearing your best clothes. Can't bribe the door on your way to the sky. You look pretty good down here, but you ain't really good. We never learned we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. We never learned we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. You're crying, it's a sign of the time. Gotta get away from here. Just stop your crying, it'll be alright. They told me that the end is near. We gotta get away from here. Just stop your crying at the time of your life, breaking through the atmosphere. Things are pretty good from here. Remember, everything will be alright. We can meet again somewhere, somewhere far away from here. We never learn, we've been there before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. We never learn, we've been there before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. We gotta get away from here. We gotta get away from here. Stop your crying, baby, it'll be alright. You told me that the end is near. We gotta get away from here. We never learn, we've been there before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? Bullets. We never learn, we've been there before. Why are we always stuck and running from bullets? The bullets. Talk enough. We should open up before it's all too much. Will we ever learn? We've been here before. It's just what we know. Stop your crying, baby, it's a sign of the times. We gotta get away. We got to 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 run. We got to run. We got to run. We got to run. Came out of the blue. Girl, I had no clue until I met you. Always had my eyes on you. Still I was unable to see through. We can bring it back to where we started. Pick up where we left off. You decided belong to you, belong to me. Oh, you know there's no other place I'd rather be. Came and everything just fell into play. At first I thought it was just another mistake. We were bound to meet again. This is not the way our story ends. We can bring it back to where we started. Pick up where we left off, you decided. Now's the time for me and you. Now's the time for me and you. Oh, tell me I belong to you, belong to me. You know there's no other place I'd rather be. Hello, everybody. Are you ready? Are you ready? Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am Ines. There's like something on my screen. The lighting is kind of, you know, I look like a ghoul from this angle, and then I look like I'm ascending to heaven from the other angle, but hey, we're here and it's all good. I was gonna do a short stream. I'm actually gonna do a PT meet today, or appointment. Take care of my body, because I need it. But anyway, how's everyone been doing? I wanted to talk about the recent death of a game, which we did on Jaeger's The Cycle and then The Cycle Frontier, so it was kind of like a 2-in-1 deal, which was pretty cool. And then I also want to talk about whatever else you guys want to talk about. Any questions you have, maybe any topics that are on my mind, anything that's caught your attention. Let me open up the chat really quickly. What's up, this guy? Huh, that's weird. Okay, like it was lagging. I was wondering, because when I clicked on the YouTube chat, I saw Drowercorn's message saying working on a conference presentation while listening in. But then for some reason I didn't see it, but maybe it's just delayed. You got one question? Yeah, get your questions in throughout the show. Don't feel rushed, or whatever else. I'm just gonna go pull up the video real quick just to see kind of what the top comments and top responses are. Okay, so first I'll talk about the overall kind of like process of making The Cycle and The Cycle Frontier, the death of a game. So basically how it ended up working is I do my normal process of putting out feelers, if you will, asking people, hey, is there anything that you're interested in, that, you know, telling me about this game that would talk about why it either did well or didn't do well. And in many cases, that during that process, I'm able to get messages from developers. And in this case, I was able to get multiple messages. And it's crazy because it's like the story that I ended up telling, I don't think people even necessarily realize it. I mean, it's the video is doing pretty well considering, but I'm saying like I don't know how much people realize like so much of that, as told to me from another employee, is just like the only way you can know that stuff is that you have to know somebody on the inside. And so I don't always have videos like that, especially ones that feel like I'm really peeling the curtain back. And sometimes that's just luck or timing. But in this case, I managed to get multiple sources, which really helped aid the process of making the video. And so if people are wondering, okay, so you have good sources, how do you still go about making the series? And that's actually something that I find is unique about what I do versus maybe what some other people do, especially like journalists in other fields. And not that I'm calling myself one, but just comparing it to that, which is that they will oftentimes, like when they're talking about a particular topic, really take to center stage the developers' perspectives. Now, I feel like what's unique about my content is that I absolutely take developer testimony in perspective, especially if it's like hard factual data, right? That being said, their conclusions I don't always agree with. In fact, I'll even admit, sorry developers, if you're listening, but a lot of the time I don't actually even tune in to kind of what the reasons are. And it's because I find that people that are really engrossed into something just have like blockers in a lot of cases. Like when it's your job, you're just gonna miss a lot of things that maybe other people, and I'm not saying all the time, I've talked to developers that are incredibly aware what the issues are of their game and so on and so forth, but sorry, I'm trying. But I wouldn't say that that's the norm. And so that's kind of like the process is still make my normal show the way that I make it, which is basically building a timeline, finding a bunch of data points to back that up, and then forming conclusions from that. Especially if developers provide their public reasons, which is very rare, private reasons, which is more common as I'm discussing here, sources, and then you also look at the players' perspectives. Now, one thing that I think you have to understand about data collection, this is just period, but especially in my kind of job, is, and really any of my kind of jobs, consultancy, you name it, is that you have to really understand how to parse data. And it's something that I think people misunderstand. Like, for example, I'll get some people go in one direction where they pretend like I'm a mega brain, Netherist brain or something, that I just have all this knowledge in my head. And the other extreme is people saying, oh, all you're doing is just looking up Wikipedia articles and then just da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, if that's all I'm doing, I would have been dead in the water, right? Nothing would have made me unique in that sense. And nothing would have made me stand apart. And I also wouldn't get the attention from the developers if I was just reading Wikipedia articles. It's because I'm not just reading whatever happens on a timeline. I actually also offer my perspective from either my expertise in whatever particular game or genre, or in some cases I straight up admit if I don't have any expertise and that I have to rely on other people. I did that in my duelist video. I said, look, I play card games, but I don't play these kind of card games. So like I had to talk to other people that are way better, way smarter, and way more in the know on this stuff than I am. And that's, you know, you have to do that if you want to cover a bunch of online games, you know, because truth be told, if it was just the games that I feel like I'm a quote unquote expert in the field in, then it would just be RTS games, MMOs, online RPGs, shooters, much it. You know what I'm saying? Like there wouldn't really be anything else. And I mean, obviously RPGs and just narrative games in general, but I'm just saying like there'd be so many other even within subgenres, within some of the genres I just mentioned, that I wouldn't be able to cover because I just don't have the experience. So that's why it's important for me to make sure that I am constantly getting more experience, right? But I'm also impressing developers in terms of what my knowledge and what my conclusions are. My interest in impressing players and getting your interest, guys, is entertaining you. And I know that sounds like, it might sound kind of insulting in a sense, because it's like, wow, you're saying you can't educate us. Of course, like my videos and even my editorials are primarily made to be educational. That being said, I also have to make it entertaining, otherwise nobody will watch it, right? Like my initial videos got big, you know, pops, but because they were nerdcore games. If I had started with more niche games, I would have had a much smaller channel, growing at a much smaller rate. So parsing data is hard. And now you might be asking, okay, so what do you mean? Well, I'll give you an example. Every data point regarding something can give you a false positive or a false narrative. And that's because data in itself isn't the thing that teaches you anything, right? So here's what I mean. It's the conclusions you draw from it. So for example, people might say, and it's funny because it might sound trite to some people, like, why do I care so much about this stuff? But ironically, growing up, it's the biggest reasons I got involved in content creation is because growing up, I felt like people weren't honest about narratives and, you know, the cold hard facts concerning certain games, their viability, and how well they were doing. And for people wondering, oh, was Death of a Game something you just came up with later on? It's like, technically, no. I actually, ever since I was a kid, I was always obsessed with how alive a game was and how dead it was. And for people wondering why, if you haven't played these kind of games, it's because you don't want to invest all your time and effort into something that's not going to go anywhere instead. So I really was obsessed constantly of wondering, how well is this game doing as a kid? I also didn't have a lot of money, being poor and also just being a kid. So I had to really choose my time wisely or play a lot of free-to-play games, which is what I did. So yeah, so you have to know how to parse the data. So for example, if I just go into this and I look at Steam reviews, that's a very jaded perspective. Steam reviews can swing any which direction. Unless you're actually parsing through them, which I do, you're not really going to get an accurate view of what the players actually think. Now that being said, I've been told by many people, oh wow, you read Steam reviews? Why do you care about Steam reviews? It's like, because I'm one person. Even if I talk to a couple developers, they're a couple of people. Even if I read a couple of video game outlets, those are a couple of people as well. Now, do they affect larger amounts of people than individual players? Yes, but they're not actually as important. And I think that that's something that people misunderstand, is that the most important thing, how I get a lot of my data, is actually listening to the player base. Actually listen to them. I see what they have to say. Oh, what are your questions? Okay, gotcha. Interesting. Have I seen the latest Minecraft game? No, I haven't. What's up, ZB? We'd know if you were just reading Wikipedia. The content creators that can't even render their own opinions on something classic, primary versus secondary source. Yeah, and I think that that's the thing that, it's funny that I actually had that as a insecurity, if you will, when I first started doing kind of more of my deep, you know, long form content. My insecurity was kind of like, I've explained the joke before that, like, I had this like eureka moment, if you will, where the thing that made me dedicate myself to content creation was because of a bit of like a concept of like sunk cost fallacy. And when I tell people this story, first off, it gives you a bit of a peek into my psyche and also how I view the world in general, which is that, like, at the time I was in the stage of my life where I was like, you know what? I feel like I want to focus on the things that I'm the best at. And that might sound very simple, but it's like, I had kind of made this decision that I was like, you know what, I want to focus, like, what am I the best at? And my thought process there is that if I focus on what I'm the best at, what I love the most, then my thought process is that I would do better, right? Very simple, very logical thought process. Well, during that process, I was working in construction, working in sales and project management, you know, you name it. And suddenly I realized, I was like, wait a minute, like, making videos and playing online games has been basically my life since I was like 7 or 8 years old. So for most of my life, I just remember online RPGs and I remember online games in general. And so that always was a factor growing up from 7, years of age on. And so the realization that I had is basically, wait a minute, I basically know life these games so much that it's like, if I don't do anything with all this time and effort, then I kind of did waste my time. And I know people view that differently because people are like, yeah, but if you had fun, it's not wasting your time. Guys, I played religious amounts of online games. And so that, past a point, it's not just about fun. It's also about replacing your real world, or, you know what I'm saying, like circumventing things and so on and so forth. So anyway, it was like the realization I ultimately had was, hey, I feel like I've dedicated so much of my life to online games that I should be talking about them. And so when I went into the space, I was still very much imposter syndrome, because it was like, okay, well, I'm making content, right, about online RPGs, but what does that really mean? And why do people still care about what I have to say? I had that problem, you know, very much early on, hardcore. And what actually changed my perspective is talking to developers. I was talking to a couple of developers of the projects that I covered. And they were just, you know, innocuous discussions where they were just like, hey, I saw your video, da da da. And first off, them even seeing the video and them having good things to say was like still surprising for me. I was still like, oh wow, that's awesome, thanks. Yeah. Oh, whoops, I played myself back. But you see what I'm saying? But that being said, when I kept talking to them, what I found very interesting is that they would refer to my knowledge of online games and mechanics as like basically encyclopedia. Like they kept repeating that to me. They're like, dude, how do you remember this? How do you know this? Like, what the heck? What the? And to me, like, to be clear, I never saw this as a benefit, a strength, or I just thought I was a loser. Right? I just thought I played so many games that I was just a loser because I knew what games people were talking about. And so I was just like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? Like, that's crazy. Because one of the guys in particular was like, that's nuts that you're able to recount stuff like that. And I was like, what do you mean? Especially because I have a bad memory in general. I was like, he's like, well, you said you named a couple of games that had a mechanic that I referenced. And I was like, yeah, I guess I did, you know? And it started to kind of dawn on me as I would talk to developers in contexts like that, that it's like, oh yeah, I can actually remember pretty much where the majority of these mechanics exist and where they come from, even like for the first time. And it's funny because my memory is horrible objectively, but that's always something that just stuck with me. And I don't know if it's just because I focus so much energy on online gaming, but whatever the reasons are, it stuck out to me. So that was something that actually changed my perspective a lot, is after he said that, I was like, huh, interesting. So people don't actually even have this like level of knowledge that I do just offhand in their brain data bank. And I think it's because people might be very educated about online gaming, but do they actually play the majority of the games? I found that not to be the case. And I think it's cool when content creators go back after the fact and try to play the games and then offer their perspective, because it's better than not. But I'm proud to say that like the majority of my videos, if I haven't played them or played them significantly, I talked to somebody who has. And yeah, so it's been a process to go through creating content and finding kind of, I guess, like where I stand and where I want to be. And I learned early on that like, while the thought and idea of being a journalist was cool, I never felt like I wanted to play by the rules. So the rules of journalism for me just seemed very like restricted. And something else I also noticed early on, and people have asked, how come your early content seems more dissertation-like than the later content? And honestly, the reason is because early on, I was taking a lot of what I was being told by developers at face value. And after I stopped, it's actually, things started to open up more. I started to realize, not necessarily that what you're being told is not true, but there's a lot more to the picture than that. And that really started to change my perspective about things. I haven't watched the video yet. What killed the cycle for me was a crazy amount of hacker spam. Oh yeah, by the way, Frag Feast, I'm just going to give you an idea into my psyche. And this is how I'm not a journalist, for example. When people tell me anything leading with I didn't watch or I didn't read, I immediately don't read whatever they have to say. And if you're wondering why, it's because I'm like kind of stupid. So like in some ways, and I have like limited bandwidth. So like I don't like to focus a lot of my energy on people that don't engage with me or don't like respect rules, if you will, of engagement. So it's like, for example, people love to point out on my videos sometimes, wow, you're so mean to people sometimes in the comments. It's like, yeah, if you read the context of why I'm being mean, it's pretty much always the same reason. It's because if I can find out that somebody who commented or said something didn't actually watch the video because of very blatant errors they're making in their argument, or they're just like not mentioning parts of my argument that are later explained, I don't have respect for that person. And you might say, wow, that's so mean. Like, what they forgot. It's like, well, the thing is that to have respect for somebody is to actually watch and engage in their content. If you're not going to actually watch my content and actually listen to it, then it's kind of like, what am I engaging with? I'm engaging with somebody who doesn't respect my content enough to actually fully engage with it, only enough until the point that they get triggered to want to have a reaction. And like, while I understand that, because like when you're watching something, suddenly someone says something and you're like, oh, like I have this thing to say. I get that, like, right? It makes you want to respond to something. But at the same time, like, the video is made to be watched in totality because it's a documentary. So it's made to be like a contained piece of timeline and information. So you can go watch it and be like, okay, this is his argument. Here's the timeline. So meaning I can separate the timeline from the argument if I want at the end of the day, but I can't actually ignore the timeline. So if you don't actually finish the timeline, then I can't really argue with you. And in fact, I'm making a video that's coming out recently, or rather soon, that's about MMORPGs versus MORPGs. And the reason that I'm hashing this discussion in a more like confrontational sense is because people keep treating it like it's supposed to be confrontational. And I'll explain that more in a second. That video is probably going to launch tomorrow. Before I do that though, let me go to the restroom because drinking all that water from my voice. All right, what did I miss? Oh, I got interested in your death of a game. Oh, fuck, my camera. My bad. I got interested in your death of a game. Sorry, my hair is messed up now. Let's do it for the third time. I got interested in your Death of a Game series. I'm glad you're finally covering Gundam Evolution, which is heartbreaking. I know you're also a huge fan of the Gundam franchise. Yeah, so to explain my fandom, since that's what I love to do in things like a podcast, I don't like to make it so official. I like to make it more kind of laid back, more like a fireside gathering. So the first Gundam I ever saw is actually not a super old Gundam. So my history as a Gundam fan, I think, is, you know, pretty interesting. I didn't grow up on old Gundam. I actually grew up on newer age Gundam, Gundam Wing, where it became a lot more fantasized or fanaticized, whatever you want to call it. Basically, it became a lot more fantasy, kind of anime-esque, than more like warlike and proper Mobile Suit Gundam, if you will. So that was actually my entry to the franchise, which surprises a lot of people because in hindsight, I always thought it was good. And then I went and saw the other series and I was just like, wow, I watched like the little kids version. And I still love Gundam Wing, so like you can't throw shade at me, but like for liking it, but it's not that good. So my love for Gundam comes from Toonami. So meaning I was a kid and it was such a love for me that I used it as my password for probably the majority of my life. Only more recently when I started to get more popularity that I started to change my passwords, but it was my password for most of my life. Gundam was not specifically Gundam and then like some amalgamation of stuff, but that's how, like, I loved gunplay. I still love it. I want to collect more. It was just always like appealing to me. And for people wondering why, if you're not familiar with Gundam, yeah, big robots doing big robot stuff is awesome, but it was also like feeling like you're rebelling against the state and you're fighting back against, you know, bad forces and trying to help society become more progressive. You know what I'm saying? Like all Gundam stories kind of like teeter on some kind of like point of that. So that's my love for Gundam. And if you're wondering what my favorite series is now, I'm probably gonna say Mobile Suit Gundam. I know it's like very cliche, or maybe even I'll go something cheesy and say like Endless Waltz. What is with this girl right here? Just like doing its own thing. But yeah, so a message was retracted. What the heck? I didn't even know someone could retract their message, but apparently someone retracted their message. I was gonna say you're more akin to a gaming historian, American studies creator than a journalist. Yeah. To be clear, I like to call myself an online gaming historian, but basically because there's just like none other of them. It's almost like default. You know what I'm saying? Where there's really not that many of us, and I've talked to pretty much all of the ones that exist, even in content creation. And yeah, I know where I stand in terms of how much time, effort, and knowledge I've put in and gathered from putting my Nubo. I saw that, you dork. Y'all are funny, man. Y'all gonna learn that I'm actually a lot more jovial than some people think. But it's because when I'm presenting arguments, I'm confrontational. And I admit that. Like, I'll be very honest about that. I actually think I've always been honest about that since I started my channel, that people forget that my first death of a game was basically made as an argument against the community. To explain what I mean, when Galaxies was kind of being talked about in popular spaces, people would always have narratives around why the game was failing. Oh, it's because NGE, it's because this, it's because that. Well, as you know, growing up as a kid, I didn't know what NGE was, so I played throughout different cycles of the game. So when I was playing throughout NGE, there was a lot of good stuff added in NGE. So it gave me perspective where I was like, I don't really know if their arguments are exactly true. And so when I went back and played the pre-CU and the CU, I was like, wait a minute. I was able to reverse engineer things and kind of be like, well, you guys are missing something too. And so my arguments presented in that video were absolutely 100% confrontation. That's what I think people don't understand sometimes about me as a person, is because I'm the detective and I'm very kind of, you know, logical presenting, right, in the videos, that people think that that doesn't mean that I'm a confrontational or argumentative person. And I think that you have a completely wrong perspective of me. I'm one of the most argumentative and confrontational people you will meet, even friendly, even just as a normal person, meaning it's just my modus operandi. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just being me. I like to scream loudly at my ideas to myself, let alone to other people. You know what I'm saying? Meaning that I argue with myself sometimes whenever I'm thinking about theory or thinking about how to write a video. So I'm even argumentative with myself. And I've just always been that way, partly because I was a loner growing up, but partly because online gaming means so much to me that I will argue anybody about it if I believe in what I'm arguing. So that means that even the creator of the industries, I will still argue them about things that I'm passionate about, things that I feel strongly about, things that I feel like there is truth in, right? Because online gaming means a lot to me as a whole. And this part is usually where people start to kind of not really understand why. And I can, look, I can understand you not understanding why something in particular would make somebody else's life so much better or transformative if you've never had those kinds of experiences. But online gaming for me was like Aladdin telling, you know, the princess to hop on the fucking magic carpet. You know what I'm saying? It was like magic carpet ride into the future kind of thing. It really changed my whole perspective of social stuff, making friends, making relationships, learning how to sell things. Like, it's funny when people would meet me in real life, they would say like, wow, you're so mature, da, da, da. And in my head, I'm like, it's partly because I had to grow up fast, but it's also partly because I grew up on the internet. So I was around people constantly just treating me like I was already an adult. And that was very addicting, I have to admit. That was a very nice feeling to get treated like I'm an adult, even when I wasn't an adult online. So online gaming to me means more than money that I make from it. So that means that I will, for example, something that I've always believed in is that just because somebody supports me doesn't mean that we're necessarily of the same opinion, right? And that's great, actually. If you can support me and we don't actually agree always, like, I have a lot of respect for viewers like that. That being said, you don't have to, if you don't respect my content and you don't like it, then ultimately you don't have to watch it, right? That's the idea, at least. But recently on my, sorry, what did you say? I remember the time Cycle Frontier was super popular as due to streamers that enjoyed EFT. Tried to stream and devs throwing Twitch drops to help with publicity. Yeah, I mean, I think super popular is a bit of a stretch, but I get what you're saying. I actually think that the game was never super popular. And I think that that is kind of confusing because sometimes people have perspectives of like, they think something's bigger than it actually is. But the cycle was never like actually super popular. And a good way to test that is whenever they were celebrating their player numbers in betas, they were celebrating sub-million numbers. Now, to 99% of developers that are not AAA or big, that sounds amazing, but that's not actually that good in online gaming, especially in like the kind of game they were trying to make. Bragging about sub-1 million players it actually means that like you're 30 times smaller than the biggest shooter. You know what I'm saying? Like 40 times, like no joke, these are real numbers. Like you're 30 times smaller than the biggest shooter. So it's like that you don't need to be the same size, but you see what I'm saying? You're gonna have to compete against a shooter that's 30 times bigger than you, has way more money, has way more market share, has way more permanence and exposure in the market. You see what I'm saying? It's just that's what makes it hard to beat classic games, if you will. Considering giving WoW Classic Hardcore a go, hey man, enjoy it. I think hardcore playthroughs are awesome. Hey, just got here. The Destiny 2 servers are on fire a bit at the moment, so I thought I'd pop in for a bit and see how's it going. Well, I'm just talking about kind of whatever, as usual. But I wanted to talk a little bit I started off, I should say, talking about how to parse data. And that got me talking about kind of my career in general. So, if people are wondering, because this is a question that I think people should be asking after hearing what I'm saying is, so how do I end up increasing my knowledge in online gaming for theory or for practicality purposes? And my answer is actually just playing them. Playing a lot more of them. But playing them with what you call a developer's eye. So play these games and try to understand how they work. For example, play your favorite game, Final Fantasy XIV, and try to understand why certain NPCs are clickable and why some aren't. Or why you can walk to a certain part but it's blocked off. Or why are there some parts that you can jump on top of? Or why are the cameras in particular angles when you walk? Like you start to learn that like there's reasons for this, whether it's technical limitations, whether it's developer decisions, right, to make the camera look a certain kind of way or the visuals look a certain kind of way. These are decisions and active thought processes that developers have when they're making these kinds of games. So if you want to increase your knowledge, just become more aware. That's the first thing you have to do, is become more aware. So just start thinking, how does this work? How many players are in this zone? How does this zone function when there's no players here? If you start to think about more stuff like that, you'll notice that your knowledge will increase exponentially. And it's because you are already familiar with the games that you're doing this to. So you'll actually know a lot more than you realize. So that's the first thing I would say. Second thing is just start paying attention to timelines. There's a very famous timeline out there. You can go look it up. I'll pull it up on screen. It's called biobreak.wordpress.com/MMO-timeline. And this is a timeline starting from 1983, the first text-based MUD. So you can basically read about every game ever launched in the online gaming community, meaning not just massive online RPGs, but even online RPGs, and when they died. Now it stops in 2023, which is actually current, awesome. But you get my point, like the red is the ones that are dead, the blue are the ones that launch, the bold ones are the ones that launched. Oh no, sorry, blue is the ones that go free to play. Bold are the ones that launch, and regular gray are expansions. So you can go to places like this, boom, your knowledge and understanding goes up exponentially, because now you have a thread you can trace things back to. Um, and then another way is really actually just going back and playing the old game and trying to understand why people feel so strongly about it. And I don't always recommend that as the first thing, because I think it actually takes more understanding and awareness before you do that. Because if you can have understanding and awareness of your favorite modern game, then going back and reviewing an older game will actually be easy, because you'll have a better understanding of why that game is not modern any longer, and maybe some reasons that are cool things that you could learn from those old school games. So those things will greatly increase your ability now. For people wondering how did I do it myself, it was through testing. And it's funny because looking back, I honestly don't have much to say about this other than it's just a fucking funny scenario. But growing up, guys, I got into beta testing, closed beta, alpha tests of very famous MMOs through sheer brute force and constantly trying to get engaged in these betas. You might be wondering why. Honestly, very dumb reasons. I just wanted to play these games first. I just wanted to play these games. I was just such a big fan of these games that I would play them. And so after a while, I started to get invited to more alphas and more betas. And it didn't start dawning on me until then, probably like 2010, 2011, that I was like, oh wow, this is actually like something that's unique. You know, I'm beta testing, I'm alpha testing. I'm not just playing the games early. And so I think that in a roundabout sense, that's what increased my love, knowledge, and understanding of how the games are developed, was through testing them. But my desire to test them was never anything more than just wanting to have fun. And maybe that makes sense, right? Because that's why I did it so much. But I guess the point that I laugh at it now, if you're wondering why I'm laughing at it, is that now, if someone wanted me to test a game, the only way I would do it is if I just wanted to, unless they paid me. Meaning that, like, I get paid to test games now. I don't just play them for free anymore. Like, that used to be something that I did all the time. Now, the thought of testing somebody's game for free, it's an absolute no. I will never test someone's game for free. Unless, again, it's a favor of a friend, or I just love the game so much that I just want to test it. That's just, you have to be business-like with your time, because time is limited. And, knowledge is also limited too, so that's the idea. I played about 5 hours of the cycle and it felt jank. Your video covering its death was really nicely done. I appreciate that, Gathry's Galaxy. I put a lot of effort into that, but I really just have to, again, thank the community and the developers for just giving me... I mean, it's like somebody giving you silver bullets in your gun. You know what I'm saying? When you're shooting, like, mythical creatures. Like, hey, I just had the gun pointed. Like, y'all gave me the silver bullets. Have you ever thought about doing a Death of the Game on Dragon Raja? And it's such a weird MMO because it still exists, but from what I can tell, it was never technically finished. Well, something not being finished is not why I make the Death of a Game series, unless it was not finished in the sense that it never got launched. So meaning that, like, if it still got launched, which I've done videos, like, I think advertising that game before, it sounds familiar, then, you see what I'm saying, then we're kind of talking more about semantics in that case. If you're wondering what makes it on the Death of a Game series, it's games that have literally died or games that are dying. And as much as people like to ignore the second part, dying is a process. Which means if you lose, like, Halo Infinite, for example, like, over 90% of your population, you're dying. Like, statistically, you're dying. It's like in statistics and math, like, people don't debate that kind of stuff. They would call that deterioration, meaning you're dying. So it's like when people wonder, why are you so harsh on New World? Why do you think the expansion's not going to save the game? Because I'm using math, guys. I'm not even that good at math, guys. Seriously, like, I went to a top public school, but I was one of the worst kids at math. And yet, I feel like I'm using math and nobody wants to use it because they're so caught into their feels. It's like New World would need a 300% increase that it hasn't had in its past 2 major increases. So why would it suddenly have that? Like, there's no, like, thought processes logically that people are using. They're just thinking, oh, it's just more content. I love it. And it's like, that's great. But statistically, that won't actually mean that it will have a big revival. And I guess it makes me not very fun at parties for being that guy. But online gaming and trying to tell the story of it as accurately as possible, it just means more to me than anything else. Tell me about a dead game that nobody knows here because it's too obscure for the average people to know. I mean, I could just pick games that I covered but didn't have very big. They didn't have a lot of views, just to put very bluntly. Auto Assault. So people don't know that NCSoft actually attempted a Twisted Metal style shooter driver game, right? And in this game, the whole point of the game was to upgrade your vehicle to do combat with the other players. Now, if you're wondering why I would pick this one as a dead obscure one, it's because the game technically never really launched. I think they got it into open beta and then just pulled the plug. They didn't have a lot of faith in the product and they weren't sure what they were doing. And I talk about it because not only would a Twisted Metal style online game be cool, nobody really even knows that NCSoft attempted the game in the first place. So that's one of the ones that I would pick. Auto Assault, it's called. There's not that much footage about it online, sadly. But that's one. And then, I mean, it's funny, like, I'm in a racing game craze right now, but I'm actually going to choose for my second one, another racing game. Motor City Online. I'm choosing Motor City Online, sorry, because the kids are in the background. Y'all know I have the school next door. I choose Motor City Online because it was basically Need for Speed 2's engine, Hot Pursuit, with more cars, more access, and kind of like an in-game economy system. And although it got rejected hard because people want to have access to cars right away and don't want to grind in games that they're not used to grinding in, I actually thought that the concept's really cool. And although you couldn't actually like walk around as a person, you just drove around, which really limits the game. I would really like to see more games like this made, more online games where you can run around, not GTA, right? But like an actual, like, you can actually race and run around in the world. I would like to see more games like that. So I would pick Motor City Online as being my second game because it was basically revolutionary despite no one ever knowing anything about it. So, trying to remember who published it. EA did, of course they did, because it's Need for Speed. So yeah, that would be another one that I would choose. The math on Wayfinder shows death. I'll talk about it more. It's not really on my radar right now because I'm covering Gundam Evolution. And then after that, I'm covering Club Penguin. Ooh, there's some secret sauce. But I'm excited for Club Penguin, by the way. I'm almost done with Death of Game Gundam Evolution. So the excitement is kind of like subsiding. But I'm super excited about covering Club Penguin. I think it's going to be a super interesting story. Club Penguin, I think, is probably... Dude, this is going to sound strange, guys. One of the worst failures in MMO history. Because it never actually failed. It got tanked. Because of business reasons. Essentially, two businesses competing with each other. Another company bought it out, tried to make a newer version of it, and it failed. So it just died. So, like, I actually think that, like, Club Penguin is one of the most interesting stories in the online gaming phase, or space, because it was incredibly, massively, widely successful, and yet failed because of bad decisions. And so I think the sad thing about it is that why it's such a catastrophic failure is because it signaled in the space, the online RPG space, the death of social gaming in many cases. And that might sound like an exaggeration, but look at where social gaming shifted more towards. It's more in online RPGs, more Animal Crossing style games, Stardew Valley. These games have taken over as being the social game, despite games like Club Penguin being far more social. But it's because you can't play games like Club Penguin anymore, meaning in modern live context. So I think that its death was a massive death knell to the social online gaming space. Because remember, social online gaming is a subgenre of massive online gaming or online RPGs, because subgenres are things. And social games focus a lot more on being social. In fact, much of the time, they don't even have combat. Toontown's another example of a game like that failed. These are games that present puzzles, mini games, and focus on being social. What I think is unfair about these games is that people have almost adopted this like false narrative now, because then not that many of them exist, or in popular context, like Mabinogi is still around, but it's tiny, is they've adopted this narrative that they died because they suck. And that's why I'm so excited to do Club Penguin, because that is not why Club Penguin died. The game and the company behind it was sold for almost $500 million. So don't ever let anyone try to tell you otherwise, because they'll try to warp the narrative. And you might ask, why do people do that? It's because people just like to simplify stories and simplify narratives. And so they want to be able to say, well, this thing died, so obviously it sucks. They don't understand that like having that mentality is actually not very good in online gaming. Because most of the time something fails in online gaming, it's because of issues in the game or in the design, not because the game itself, right? Like social gaming isn't a failure, clearly, right? Otherwise, so many other genres wouldn't copy it from MMOs. But games like Club Penguin dying just didn't do much to help the narrative, the logic, and the overall permanence of social gaming. So that's why I'm so excited to cover it. Gene, you gave feedback on which one? Club Penguin? Because yeah, save the Club Penguin stuff for when I do that community post. What about Xenogears? Honestly, I don't know that much about Xenogears. I'm familiar with it, but I'm not super well versed in it. That's like saying Blade Runner was a bad movie because it commercially failed. I mean, kind of in a sense. I feel like that's probably more like Toontown, because Toontown was small fish. Club Penguin guy is like, here. My numbers were slightly inflated, except if you count value. So if you count full value, I actually undersold it. Here's why you can't listen to people that don't know what they're talking about, especially trying to tell you that games like Club Penguin don't work or don't have a space. It was a cash payment with the opportunity to double that if they met their target. Doubling 350 mil is 700 million. Now, in the end, they actually didn't get it. But you see what I'm saying? Meaning that, like, this deal was valued at $700 million. What MMO have you ever heard being anywhere close to valued at that? There isn't one. And that's what I'm saying is this. I know it's funny to make fun of Club Penguin. I've always made fun of Club Penguin, including getting banned in Club Penguin myself, right? But don't shake a stick at Club Penguin. What they had was essentially another blockbuster that we almost forgot about. So A design question. What do you think about MMOs changing their opening sections and early game content? When should they make these changes, and what should they do to preserve story continue? So the issue with this is that in an ideal world, if developers were just focused on doing their job as best as they could, early game zones and 1 to 50 experiences, or 1 to 80, or 1 to 70, or 1 to 60 wouldn't suck. It just makes no logical sense. You would. It's like having a storefront, the front of the storefront looking like shit. It doesn't make any sense. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like you would make it look as nice and appealing as possible. So people that ever argue to you that early game experiences being shite is just normal because reasons, you can always tell them it makes no logical sense why it's bad. It doesn't make any actual sense. Now, there's logical reasons why it becomes worse, and that's kind of what Dragoncorn's hinting at here, which is that after every subsequent expansion, that vertically expands the game. Sorry, that's my alarm, making sure I don't stream too much longer. I'm gonna have to go pretty soon, guys. Vertically expand the game out, these expansions, that's what makes the early game experiences in many cases become lessened or cheapened. Sometimes new mechanics are added, things like flying mounts. Sometimes you get better companions, so on and so forth. And so the early game content and zones become essentially trivialized. Now, my dog asked to come in here, and then because I have all the doors closed, she's like getting roasted, and I hear her huffing and puffing back there, and I'm just like, dogs, why did you want to come in here? Yeah, anyway, so the way I think to approach it is like this. If you want to constantly build a vertical treadmill expansion style, you know, game cycle, you're always going to have some effect on the earlier game experiences that's just going to be hard to balance fully. It's just hard, right? Because you're expanding the ceiling. That being said, if you can keep a lot of the newer stuff separated zone-wise or mechanic-wise from the old stuff, kind of like how some games do it, I think you can avoid some of that. So I think by that point, it's just used more as an excuse that people have. Oh, the early game experience sucks because the late game is different. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense because they're different experiences. They're separate from each other. So theoretically, the end game should not affect the early game experience that much, even though it does in some ways. But it shouldn't, really, right? The other thing, too, is that early game experiences being better will also provide players better ways to get engaged in the gameplay, not quit as fast, and also learn how to play the game better. Now you might be wondering, well then why don't developers just fix it? Sounds simple, right? Well, not only does it require some effort, there's not a whole lot of financial incentive to do it. And I know you might be wondering, well, why is that? Aren't players quitting because the early game in Final Fantasy XIV sucks? Yes. The argument is how many of them are quitting versus how many of them are buying the level boost or the story completion boost. It can't be that much more, meaning that there can't be way more people quitting than there is people buying the boost. Otherwise, they would change things. You see what I'm saying? So, if they weren't making money from the fact that the early game experience sucks, they would change it, just to be very blunt. And Final Fantasy XIV is interesting because they actually attempted in a small way to go back and change some of the aspects of the game. And I respect that. That being said, it was completely overbilled and oversold to an absurd, ludicrous amount. And I'll give you an example. People were telling me, oh, dude, nerd, you're going to love it. They're coming back, they're changing the main story quests. Not only did they only change a couple of quests, most of the time they just removed them. So the early game quests that suck are still there. So meaning that they made less of it suck, but it still sucks. And it's like, it was honestly one of the most pathetic attempts at like
redoing a storyline that I've experienced personally. Not that there is that many attempts like that, but it was just like, really? Moving a couple of quest markers? Moving a couple of the boring ones? It's like, that actually is not how you revamp a quest system. Or the early game system at all. And so somebody actually explained to me that there was another interview, and I clicked on that interview, and in that interview, Yoshi P literally says, maybe we would do kind of like a prestige level experience where we make it more difficult, like New Game Plus, but he thought that it would take way too much effort to do. And so I think that that's what they settled on, is fix a couple of the aspects to curb the burnout by maybe 10-20%. But at the end of the day, if you're not bought into Final Fantasy XIV, or Final Fantasy even in some cases, it's difficult to get through that leveling experience, right? And it's not the only game like that. It's just more commonly talked about because the early game experiences in SWTOR are the best experiences. And in ESO, leveling is scaled. So it doesn't really work the same way. Sorry, what was your question regarding? Epic Rendo says, what were your sources? Like, just like generally, but like, I literally don't know what you could be referencing. Do I think a big company like PlayStation could make a system? I mean, you know they've tried, right? Necro? You know PlayStation, yeah, I was gonna say, you talked about PlayStation Home too, but they already tried, so like, what are the chances that they're gonna do it again in some big way? Right now, doesn't seem like very much. VR chat's kind of like slaughtering everyone too, to be fair. Well, that's the weirdest part about it to me, Augusto, is when I was doing my stream playthrough of Final Fantasy XIV, which I got like halfway through Heavensward, I started to complain in chat about how I couldn't play with my friends. Immediately, like 10 Final Fantasy XIV souped up super soldiers respond, and they're like, bro, what are you talking about? Of course you can. You can do all these different types of content. And they start mentioning all these, like, you know, different ways to play the game, and I'm like, guys, I'm level 16. I'm trying to play with my friend right now. What do you mean you can't play with them? You just group with them. And then every cutscene, it makes me leave the group. Literally leave the group. Yeah, but you just play with each other at level 33 or 5 on the first trial, and it's like, I don't think you're understanding my point. This is not actually how MMOs have been played, ever. You can't play them that way. Which is why I keep trying to tell people it's probably more of an online RPG than an MMO, right? But like, when I would complain about this, how I knew I wasn't the target audience is that everyone just mocked me, basically saying like, oh, just get to max level, you know? It's like, not a solution. I don't really think you understand that. It's not a solution. It's just people to tell people to just get through it. Because the truth is both my friends that I was playing with quit the game immediately after that. After they realized that we couldn't really do the dungeons together. Barely, especially if we level at different rates. It was just like, how are we gonna play? How are we even gonna play? We felt like we couldn't even play together. Yeah, Gundam Evolution is the worst attempt of Bandai Namco trying to milk the franchise. I do agree with that statement. That being said, I have a very interesting point of view, I think, regarding all of this. Gundam Evolution, that is. Which is that I think they could have actually did a really good job of it. And even milked it still. But instead they went for like milking to maximum degree, Bandai style, and ruined everything, you know? But yeah, it's just it's a slightly annoying thing for me, Augusto, because it's like, I'm gonna show you guys something on screen right now. And sorry, but this is just always something that's entertaining to me. I'm gonna pull up a Shadowbringers trial. So I'm gonna pull up a very recent trial of somebody playing Shadowbringers. Sorry, it's gonna have like FOV, you know, not FOV, like classic AMV style music. Alright, here's a guy doing a trial, the Dying Gasp. Mind you, he's doing it on normal difficulty, but still. Okay, he looks like he's getting grabbed or something. Let's skip ahead. Okay. Alright. I see some MMO action. There's people are moving around a little bit. It's funny because someone in chat yesterday said you have to move all the time now. If this is moving all the time, I guess we have very different definitions of moving all the time, but they're rooted in place so they can't move right now. Uh-oh, cutscene. Let's look at the fidelity on this cutscene. It's grainy all the way through. Now, mind you, relax. I get Final Fantasy XIV is a very good looking game. Here's the point that I'm trying to make. That is, I'm sorry, it's just bizarre to me that people don't understand. So in my video, I talked about how had Final Fantasy XIV not even appealed to being massive in the first place, ever, like before they were A Realm Reborn, and they just made this kind of game online, it would be better in every way, shape, or form. And still to this day, nobody's ever argued against this point of mine, or really even tried, and I find it interesting because on my recent video, for example, people were like, wow, you're trying to say like Shadowbringer sucks, but look at how high rated it is. Okay, riddle me this, guys. Did what I show you look anything close to this? Animations wise? No. Graphics wise? No. Cutscenes wise? No. Voice quality wise? No. Smoothness of transitions, not having to use MMO weird menus and shit that are like clunky and you can't really customize in Final Fantasy XIV? Not in sight. Literally, it's not even on the screen. Not even if I go to gameplay when they're talking.
Yeah, come on, y'all. Let's go bag us a chocobo.
Okay, Barrett talking about some stuff. Sneaking around, showing some different types of gameplay, right? Sneaking gameplay. I would show off some movement. Riding on a chocobo, right? Combat. So what they've managed to do here is a strategic combat system that is a hybrid action combat system. In my opinion, this is the best version of the Final Fantasy combat system I've ever personally seen. Now, relax, I get people can like turn-based more. The point that I'm trying to make is I think that this is a beautiful blend of action combat and the strategy combat that makes Final Fantasy Final Fantasy. So when I think of Final Fantasy at its best, this is what I imagine, right? Now, when I think back to, again, the gameplay I was just showcasing, it doesn't look bad for an MMO, but what I struggle to understand is how does this even look anything comparable to each other? Like, maybe I'm just it sounds like I'm an MMO hater, right? It sounds like I'm arguing against MMOs or online RPGs in this case. But it's like, no, but like genuinely, like, what about this looks cleaner, smoother, prettier, sexier? Any adjective that I can use. I guess just personal preference. And that's the point that it's like, when I try to make that and Final Fantasy XIV fans will still come to the defense, it's just like, you're telling me you don't want this level of gameplay in your game? Why don't you want better graphics? Why don't you want better gameplay and story? I don't really get it, you know? I get that it works for you, but like, why not have it better? You know, just why not? Gundam Evolution was great, just Bandai literally greeted it too hard. They did abandon it, for sure. What about Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Frontier, the MMO game? So yeah, those to me are quintessential ORPGs. Not only do they branch from Phantasy Star Universe, which branches from Phantasy Star Online, which is as dead to rights and online RPG as you can get, especially coming from the same market. For me, those games are very much the same style of game we're talking about here. And they're gorgeous because they focus a lot more on what we're talking about. So really what I'm saying is in a sense, the genius of Final Fantasy XIV is the fact that they're not a traditional JRPG in a sense, right? They're more like a Western MMO. That being said, had they actually focused more on what their market and culture normally focuses on, story and smaller scale content, it could have looked like Monster Hunter World. It could have played like those games. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, okay, well, I don't like one of the things people will tell me is, I don't like action games. Okay. Well, then what about Final Fantasy VII? What about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? It has turn-based combat as well. It's just a hybrid system. So it's like, you're never going to be able to argue me that that is worse than a 2.5 second GCD. It's just, we can call it personal preference, and I'll leave it at that. But it's like, a streamer friend of yours said that he liked it because of the story. And the gameplay is mostly cutscene, 75%. Yeah, which makes my arguments about gameplay mattering as much probably not matter as much, right? But even then, I'm going to push back slightly and say that, like, something that I found to be interesting, which I don't even know if a lot of people know this, but did you know that pre 2.0 changes, the game not only looked better, it had more graphical assets in the game, and it had motion capped animations and character models. It doesn't have those anymore. They shrunk the amount of pixels used, they shrunk the graphics and lighting, and they also shrunk and what's the one I just said? Whatever the one that I just said before that. So you see what I'm saying? Like, they had to compromise on those things to make the game the way that they wanted to make it, which was a massive success. But the point that I'm making is that the game could have and did have potential to look much better. I think they had to pare it down though, from being a bigger game. And that offers a lot of constraints. It means that they were unable to free themselves from whatever model they were kind of already built into, right? Since they didn't make a new game, they just remade whatever game they already had. And simultaneously, I think that you know, the newer age Final Fantasy games have the benefit of not being multiplayer, period. But this narrative that people seem to have that Rebirth isn't possible online, I'm sorry, it's just delusional at this point. Those games are possible, hence Monster Hunter World, hence Dragon's Dogma. So don't listen to the marketing that much. When every other Japanese developer is capable of doing it, it's like, you guys don't think Final Fantasy could do it in an online game? Of course they could. They chose to do the best of what they could with what they had, which makes sense. But then don't defend it against better systems. That's the, like Des says, it's the most bizarre thing to me. Because it's one thing if someone says, man, I love the combat system, man, I love the story, man, I love the graphics. What am I going to say to you? No. Like, I can't say anything to you. But if you were to say, like, I literally got comments saying this, oh, I don't know why you're saying Final Fantasy 16 is better. It actually got worse reviews. And it's like, because it's being graded on a scale. Like, are we fucking serious here? You think the fucking cinematics are comparable? The best compliment Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers got is that it's vaguely like a Final Fantasy mainline game. Not the best one. So, hey, I'm just trying to argue in favor of better online RPGs. But, you know, that's gonna make some people mad. On the topic of the day, death of a game in the cycle, do you think making a co-op PvE extraction shooter in the likes of Tarkov without PvP would be viable? It has never been done. Just like any game that doesn't have PvP, your world itself and the PvE threats have to be so dangerous that it's a constant struggle. Survival games do this pretty well. Even survival games that don't have PvP. So that's how you have to do it. You have to make the environment kick your ass. And the reason why most developers don't like to do that is because players always complain. Like, players will complain when